many of us are new.
This is Karen, and I have to brag about Tom for a second because I was so nervous going in and turning in my oral assessment for my ACC. And Tom came to my rescue and he coached me a couple of times, and I felt very confident when I went in and passed the first time around. So thank you again, Tom, but I just highly recommend his coaching and how he laid out the PCC markers for me and what I needed to work on. It was probably the best coaching session I've ever had. So I know I'm embarrassing you. You don't want to hear that, Tom, but too bad, because I wanted to really appreciate the support that you gave us. And a lot of us have that at UTD, but this was very powerful for me and very helpful. So thank you.
No, Karen, please don't stop. No, I want to thank Karen. That was very kind of you. Thanks, Karen. I want to thank Karen. I want to thank Rachel for arranging for me to be here. And you guys just let me know when you're ready for me to launch.
Yeah. I think we're about ready. I kind of did an introduction of Dr. Tom Krapu in our email. So you kind of have an idea of who he is, and he's going to kind of give us a bunch of information. And I also gave you the PDF of the slides, so you can have that ahead of time, but this is also be in front of you, so you can go back and reference it as well. I think this information will be wonderful for all of us as we prepare to take the ACC, to be tested, and to be ready to move forward in coaching. So thank you, Tom, for being here, and I think the floor is yours.
Thanks, Rachel. I know we've only got about 20 minutes here, so my presentations are usually and always really content rich, but we're really going to try to slam through some material here because there's some real high points I want all of you to take away from the call today that are going to help you feel more confident and more prepared for that ACC exam. This is a subset of a much larger presentation I do on my PCC Marker Taxonomy, which I'll talk about just for a minute or two. But let's dive in here. We're going to go over the history of the markers. What are exactly the markers, in case you're not very familiar with them, how they're used to evaluate coaching. And that's really critical, because if you know the rules of the game, it makes it a lot easier to play, right? And it gives you more confidence because you kind of understand the process that you're getting into and going through. Then, like I said, I'll touch on the marker taxonomy, talk a little bit about mentor coaching, and then, you know, kind of like where to go from here as you continue to evolve towards that ACC. So boom, all that in 20 minutes.
Well, and don't feel pressured on the time. We just have it generally set. Well, we have an hour, and we leave time just to discuss and that kind of thing, but we're pretty free flowing. So
Catherine, I really appreciate that. So I appreciate that. But I've already gauged this to do this probably in 20 or 30 minutes. So
excellent.
So the markers, you know, the ICF created the core competencies in 1998, which, wow, what is that, 22 years ago now. And that started with 8 coaches and directors and professors of coaching program. These were the founders of our profession. They all got together and they created these 11 core competencies, which were all probably pretty familiar. They've been redesigned and re-released this last year, but the core of it remains the same. In 2008, they validated the core competencies. And I was actually a part of the ICF international teams that helped do that in 2008. And so that formed like the core of our profession. And it helps us see that coaching really is a semi-structured interview, because when you're really coaching well, you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's one of the ways I approach my mentor coaching is how are each of those 3 sections done? Because there's certain things you want to accomplish with each one of those. And in some ways, the original core competencies kind of lined up into that structure of what a coaching conversation is. Now, the markers themselves, they started developing them in 2011. And they were originally released in 2013, which I can't believe it's 7 years ago already. but it was an amazing amount of work that went into creating them. They, again, had an international team of professional coaches that the ICF put together. They analyzed PCC level coaching sessions that had been submitted for certification and were deemed at the PCC level. So that was the standard they used. And what they did was they analyzed those behaviors. The goal was, what are these coaches actually doing? Because the core competencies are like more abstract principles. And this whole effort was trying to identify what are the behavioral requirements of coaches? How do coaches actually exhibit those core competencies? And they came up with 47 different PCC markers. And the marker training started soon after that. At UT Dallas, I had the good fortune of being able to go through the marking training as a faculty member. And then these PCC markers, they've really become the standard professional certified coaching. And that's why we're going to be talking about them today. I'll send out that link at the bottom of this page when we're done. But you can also get the PCC markers off of, actually, I don't know if you can get these PCC markers off the ICF webpage anymore, because the PCC markers have been recently updated in October of 2020. And what they did was they aligned them to the new core competencies. But the good thing to know about these changes is these are not tectonic changes. These are kind of revisions or updates. So the new markers are not that dramatically different than the old ones, just like the new core competencies have some things added to it. But the heart of that work that was done 22 years ago still stands up. Michigan. So let's talk a little bit about the underlying theory of the markers. It doesn't replace the core competencies. The core competencies are still at the heart of what coaching is. This is a really important key, is the way you demonstrate coaching, the way you demonstrate core competencies, the way you demonstrate the markers, all has to do with how the coach responds to what the client offers. So in other words, what's key to being graded successfully and what's key to effective coaching is we're responding to the client. We're not making it up on the fly. This goes to the heart of our knowledge about coaching, is right. Our coaching is client-centered. So everything we do is in response to the client. That's how we give them agency in the conversation and how we facilitate the conversation. And so what does the client offer is at the heart of that. And it's what evaluators are looking for. It's not only what do you say as a coach, but how does it correspond to what the client has just offered as a part of the conversation. Again, coaching is a semi-structured interview. The markers can be used almost anywhere in a coaching session, but our coaching agreement, we all know the coaching agreement is the first thing we do in a coaching session. So that's how I define the beginning. The beginning phase of the coaching agreement is really constructing a robust, complete coaching agreement. And that's the first part of that structure. Some markers are more active or coach initiated, like some of the 2.X markers. Like when we sit down with a client and we say, so what do you want to accomplish from our conversation today? We're not waiting for our client to tell them what they want to accomplish. We're really actively initiating that part of the conversation. So there's times when coaches drive the conversation in the service of the client, and those are more active markers. And that's one of the things I draw out in my taxonomy, is which markers are more active and which ones aren't. And the more active ones are ones that in some ways the coach has to take more more responsibility for. There's some obligation on our part. Like there's an obligation on our part to create a coaching agreement. If we're not creating a coaching agreement with our client, a lot of coaches would say that coaching isn't even taking place if you don't have a good coaching agreement. And then when evaluators score, listen to a tape and read the transcript of a coaching session, what they're looking for is, first of all, evidence of the markers. So what is the client doing? Well, what is the client doing? What is the coach doing in response to the client? And how does that behavior align to one of these 47 behavioral markers? And that gives evidence that a marker is being demonstrated. But another thing, and this is what makes evaluating coaching tapes pretty complex, is the other thing that evaluators are looking for are missed opportunities. So for instance, let me give you a classic example I see a lot is the client says something and the coach does a very accurate and good reflection of what the client just said, but they just leave it at that. Well, one of the markers, I don't have the number offhand, I think it might be 7.3. One of the markers is coach makes an observation and inquires to the meaning of that, of the observation, or inquires to the meaning of what's being reflected. So if you simply observe and reflect what the client has said, but if you don't add some inquiry to that, like even saying, is that right? Or more importantly, maybe a powerful question like, why is that important? Then you're not adding any inquiry. And that's actually a missed opportunity for another marker. This marker I'm talking about, that where a coach makes a reflection, but then it becomes much more powerful if you add inquiry to that reflection. And so if the inquiry is missing, it's actually a missed opportunity for that marker. So I'm just using that as an example. There's a lot of things we do as a coach that might be evidence of a certain marker, but it might actually be a real missed opportunity for something else that could have been done. And so that when people are evaluating tapes, we're doing that. We're listening for the evidence of markers, and we're also looking for missed opportunities. Now, the one thing that'll comfort you as a coach is there's 47 markers. And I know when people first hear that, they think, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed. How can I demonstrate 47 markers in a coaching session that's no longer than, isn't it 45 or 50 minutes or something is the limit of the tapes you can submit? Well, how can I do that? And the truth is, you don't have to demonstrate every marker in every coaching session. Now, it gets a little bit complicated. At UT Dallas, as well as ICF, if I'm an evaluator, all I do is collect the evidence, and I make an indication, and I do this in my mentor coaching too. I make an indication if yes or no, was this marker demonstrated, yes or no? And there's going to be no's there, because not every coach, not only do you need to, you don't need to, but you aren't going to demonstrate every marker in every session. But then I turn that scoring sheet over to UT Dallas, and this is what the ICF evaluators do. And UT Dallas actually does the scoring, because you have to have a predominance of markers in each of the area of competency. So in other words, you have to demonstrate all the core competencies, even though you're not required to demonstrate every single marker. And so don't worry about, oh my gosh, you finish a session, it's like, oh my God, I know that one marker. I know I didn't do that one now that I think back. That's not going to be a deal breaker. So let's look a little bit about how these markers are used to evaluate. The markers, and again, when I'm gathering evidence, and when I'm doing mentor coaching, I'm doing the same thing when I'm evaluating coaches. The only difference is I evaluate a coach's tape, and then I provide that exact that exact evidence back to the coach so that you can actually see the markers you hit and see the ones that you didn't. More on that later. But what I'm doing is based on your behavior, not on the client's behavior. And ICF was really smart in doing this, because what they're trying to do is remove a source of bias, because we don't want someone to get certified as a coach just because they have a fantastic client. And we don't want a coach to fail because they don't have that good a client. So we're evaluating the coach's behavior, not the client's response. And for instance, if you ask a really powerful question and your client completely ignores that question and goes off on some tangent and some different topic, you're still going to get credit for that powerful question because you asked it. You demonstrated that competency. So we're looking at coach behavior, not how the client responds. It's really important as you study the markers to try to avoid using them like a checklist to coach from. So really the markers are all these arrows in our quiver, and they're customized to what the client offers. And so we're constantly listening and responding to our clients in a way. And one of the ways, I talk about this in my taxonomy, one of the ways to think about the markers is these are simply ways that we add value to the coaching conversation. Because the more of these markers we use, and when we use them effectively, the coaching is simply more powerful. But we don't want to use the markers like a checklist that we're going down while we're coaching someone. And believe me, any good evaluator, if you're doing that, it's so obvious that you can really tell when a person has the markers in mind more than their client in mind. So don't do that. Any contribution you make in your coaching conversation with your client could actually be evidence for more than one marker. So not only do you not have to demonstrate every single marker, there might be certain things you're doing as a coach that is that's a clear, open-ended question, but at the same time leads the client to think beyond their current situation to the goal they want to achieve. And those might be two different markers that are identified and demonstrated by simply one question. So there's more than one marker can be evidenced by one behavior. And here's something that was drilled into us over and over again in our PCC marker training through ICF, and that is that PCC doesn't stand for perfect certified coach. And you should take some comfort in that too. The same thing applies at the ACC level. If you're going for your ACC, ACC does not mean perfect ACC coach. I don't have time to go into that in greater depth. I do in a longer presentation, but you don't have to be perfect here. And then again, I already mentioned this, ICF does the actual final scoring, and evaluators just submit the evidence of the markers. And then at UT Dallas, we follow the same model. A separate administrator actually takes those results and actually grades for pass or fail the evidence that's presented by the evaluator. So actually, any question? Well, no, we're going to have a lot of time for questions at the end. If you have questions about any of this, jot it down and we'll come back to it. I can always come back to any of these slides too. So I want to talk just for a minute about my marker taxonomy, because one of the things that happened during the PCC marker training, I asked a question, and that was, you've got these 47 different markers. What are the relationship between those markers? And what I was told by ICF that kind of made sense at the time was, with the research we've done so far, and it wasn't there's more research to be done, but with the research and the evidence we have right now, we don't have anything to say about the relationship between those 47 markers. So we're treating them as completely independent. And there's also a good reason they were doing that, because PCC evaluators, we want evaluators to look at coaching and look at each marker as independent and needing to be demonstrated independently from any of the others. So it makes sense that ICF has that position, but I'll tell you, that got the wheels turning for me, because I left that one training call thinking there's got to be a relationship between these markers. And so I spent about 8 months meditating on this and just letting it work on me in my sleep and when I was awake and when I was coaching and when I was mentoring. And then after about 8 months, I actually sat down and took the markers and started working with them. And what it created was a structure. I call it a taxonomy because it kind of really is. It's a structure of the 47 markers in terms of different patterns that exist within them. It's not meant to replace the core competencies. It's not meant to take away from the focus on the individual markers, but it organizes these markers into functional categories to better understand what are these 47 here. This is overwhelming to have 47 things I have to focus on. What if I could narrow that 47 things into 6 things? And that's what I did. I talked a little bit about active markers. That's one section of the taxonomy, really pulls out the active markers that coaches have a little bit more responsibility for initiating. This is not today's topic. This is a slide from my bigger presentation. There are learning markers, which is how we create awareness. There's questioning markers that have to do with the quality of the questions we ask. And this is my favorite category. There's the freedom from the burden of self markers. These are markers that have the greatest burden on us in terms of emotional intelligence in how we coach and how we show up with our coaching clients. And then finally, there are language markers in terms of the quality of language that needs to be demonstrated in our coaching. Oh, there's one more. Oh, no, you know what? It used to be 6 categories. 2 of the categories were combined into the freedom of burden of self markers. I forgot that. So I've got some information here I'll push out in case you're interested. I've got an abstract of the taxonomy you can see for free just to kind of get more details about it. And this is something I self-published in February of 2018 or 2019. I'm horrible at dates, folks. A couple of years ago, I self-published this, and there's a Kindle version on Amazon, and then there's a PDF version you can purchase directly through me. And the cost is really nominal. I think it's like $6 or something. And for people who purchase my taxonomy, I offer a discount on my mentor coaching services. And then I've also got a LinkedIn group. It's my mentor coaching group in LinkedIn that focuses largely on the taxonomy, but developing as a coach. And I'm going to keep that just to right there. So that's my 2-minute shameless promotion on my taxonomy. So here's the things that I suggest people do, whether I'm mentoring them or not. If you're not familiar with the markers, you need to really familiarize yourself with them. Each one of those markers, again, is an arrow in your quiver. So if you don't know what the arrow is, you can't use it. So I would really immerse yourself in the markers. If you're not intimately familiar with them, you just need to go over them again and again just to get them, just to have them top of mind, just to have them present. And as you're doing that, you might want to ask yourself, which of these markers am I doing naturally? Because your abilities as a coach, you're already demonstrating a whole subset of these 47 markers in the coaching you're doing right now. You're probably pretty good at those markers. And not that you can't be a little bit better, but you're probably demonstrating them already. But as you go over the markers, you'll know, if you're honest with yourself, Let me give you an example. Well, actually, I don't have time to go into too much depth. The learning markers. When the marker taxonomy came out, one of the things I shared with my fellow faculty at UT Dallas was actually a real sadness I had as these markers came out and I was looking at them, because I just reflected and thought, oh my God, I started coaching in 2001. If I had had these markers in 2001, how much better a coach would I be today if I had had these this whole time? And I really felt that way, because the markers really help you see, well, this is how you actually do coaching. So as you go through the list, you'll see, and so the learning markers were that to me. It wasn't something I ever really occurred to me to do as a coach until the taxonomy came out and the learning markers were there. And those are questions like, if you even ask your client at the end of the session, so what are you taking away from our conversation today? That's a learning marker. It's evidencing what they've actually learned. That's why it's also creating awareness. It's actually helping them capture what they've learned from the session, not just what they're going to do. So that was a new marker for me. And that's what I would suggest you do. Go through the markers. Which are the markers you're not doing? And you know you're not doing, because you read it and you think, you know what, I don't think I'm doing that. Post it up on your monitor. Think about it every day. Strengthen that arrow in the quiver so that you recognize opportunities in relation to what the client offers. And it's just like, that's when I use this marker. Oh, get it. I get it. And when you start doing that, again, you're going to find that the value you add to your coaching client in the conversation is heightened. It's enhanced, because now you're introducing another marker into the conversation that serves your client in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise if you didn't use that marker. So pick one and focus on it on a regular basis. Increase your intentionality. Keep practicing and self-evaluating over time. And most importantly, regularly record and review your coaching. Even if you don't transcribe it, at least regularly record and listen to yourself, because you hear your coaching on a whole different level when you listen to yourself coaching rather than in real time when you're coaching your client, because we're learning then too, right? Because we're reflecting as we're coaching. But when you can actually listen to what you coached, it's really powerful. And in that process, look for revealed assumptions. Strengthen the markers you're using, expand the markers that are available to you. And this is just a great developmental path that all of us are on, really, as coaches, to continually improving our craft. One more quick roll slide. Actually, this is probably going to be another minute or two of shameless promotion. Whether you use me as a mentor or not, mentor coaching can really help you evaluate those recorded sessions and give you feedback about the markers that you're skilled at and ideas about how you can further develop. And the reason for that is a mentor coach, he hears your coaching even differently than you do when you listen to it. He or she can identify things. And what I try to do when I'm working with my mentees, and that Karen was so kindly to talk about, is I look for the one thing that'll change everything. And it's pretty common that there is one thing that stands out in the way you're coaching, that if we can help you become more aware of that and aware of how to change it to align it more to the markers, what will happen is actually that you'll change that one thing and you'll start demonstrating multiple markers, maybe even up to a half dozen markers that you weren't demonstrating before, because that one thing you were doing was preventing the demonstration of a whole range of markers. And so you can have some real breakthroughs in your coaching by recognizing what that one thing is. And so that's one thing I always listen for. And it's not at all uncommon that there isn't something like that. And my hope is that, these markers in general, again, this slide's from a presentation on the learning markers, that, just working with the markers, it's going to elevate your coaching. And I added a little thing at the bottom here that I'll probably send along with the copy of the PCC mark, the ICF PCC markers. And it's a little blog I wrote about a caution about coaching supervision versus mentor coaching. And where are we at time-wise? That's probably been about 30 minutes. I think we started a few minutes after the hour. So deep breath, and let's open it up for conversation.
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm still working with this coaching development plan from UTD. I still like to go back after I've coached and looked over it. And we're all kind of peer coaching each other and working together to get better, and some preparing for the ACC, some just wanting to improve their coaching. So do you have a copy of the updated, that coaching development plan that I got at UTD? And several of these individuals are UTD students, and I know they're going to get it. But since we're already peer coaching, I'd love to have a copy of that, Tom. Do you have the updated one?
Are you meaning a blank document?
Yeah, that coaching development plan that we get at UTD, where it breaks it down and you write your comments on it. It was like a rubric that you wrote the comments on.
You know, I probably have access to that somewhere, but so when I do mentor coaching at UT Dallas, it's group mentor coaching and then individual mentor coaching. And those students I work with have already been given that document and have filled it out before I get it.
Right. Well,
so I don't have that, but yeah.
Do you have a blank one? Because I have mine, but all mine have, was what you gave me. I need a blank copy of the updated one. I have the one with the 11 markers, right, not the newest one with 8.
Yeah, I don't offhand because I don't use that. That's used in the work with students before I work with students.
Okay.
Yeah. What other comments or observations or questions do people have?
Well, one of the questions that I have, and thank you for this information, it's definitely interesting and helpful, that probably the one thing that could make the lot of difference is I have such a difficult time getting to the specific measure of success that I get hung up on that. Because that's been drilled in from my coaching, my coach. So do you have any tips for getting to that without it derailing everything else?
Yeah, and I do this a lot with my mentees, and basically what the tips I'm giving are what I do to demonstrate the marker. That's all it is. And so one of the things I'll ask clients as we're flushing out that coaching agreement, I'll just ask, how will we know if we've accomplished this today?
That's a good statement.
Yeah.
It's very simple. It really, it generates, or I should say, it demonstrates that marker of a measure for success, because you're asking for evidence of success if we're successful today.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I often find that the coachee will say, well, I want to talk about X. I want to talk about how I'm going to clean out my closet or whatever. Well, and then, well, how do you get to know if you've got that? And and it just, you just keep asking the same question in a different way, which is hard, I think. And especially when it's something that I want to feel better about, or I want to, there's nothing that's real concrete. I want to, like a lot of times I'll hear, I just really want to talk this through.
So Catherine, let me pause you there, because this is why the markers are graded based on the coach's behavior, not the client's behavior.
Okay.
So first of all, if you ask that question, well, how did I say that? How will we know we've been successful today? No, that isn't what I asked.
How will we know if we've accomplished it?
Yeah. How will we know if we've accomplished it? It almost doesn't matter how the client answers that question. You've demonstrated the marker.
Okay.
In other words, the marker is not graded on how good an answer your client gives to the question. It's based on the question you ask. So that's one thing. Another thing, and I had an argument with a fellow coach recently about this. I don't know if I don't think I want to go into all that, but here's the underlying thing that I brought up with this coach, and that is, and it's the reason I asked that question the way I ask it. It's a very projective question. How will we know we've been successful today? Or how will we know we've accomplished that? Notice that your coaching client can go anywhere with that. And when we trust our clients, we let them go anywhere with that. Like in the examples you gave, they might say, well, I want to have a plan about how I'm going to organize my closet. Or they might just say, I want to feel good about moving forward with this closet organizing thing. And what some coaches will argue is, well, a feeling they'll say that's not observable. It's like, well, that doesn't matter to me. If at the end of my call, my client says, I feel so good about having talked about organizing my closet, and there may be some action steps that are separate from those measures of success. But if I simply feel I feel better now about organizing my closet than I did before. Like before, I was terrified, I was anxious, I was worried about doing my closet. And now I'm confident about organizing my closet. My client and I have been successful, even though it's just a feeling they've accomplished. So I'm sorry, I get on a soapbox with some of these things.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that's a big thing specifically for me, because it's the beginning of the discussion.
Right.
I have another question, Tom. I had a real struggle with closing it out. Remember, I just really did. And you gave me some great advice. Would you mind sharing that? And because I was waiting till the very end, and you said, no, get it halfway there. So would you mind sharing that? Because I think that's a common mistake. I believe you told me that's one of the common errors.
Yeah, and Karen, of course, I can't remember the real details of that conversation. But let me talk about that in general, though, because if a coaching conversation is a semi-structured interview, and if it has a beginning and a middle and an end, so these are all assumptions about what I'm about to say, then you have to move from the beginning to the middle, and you have to transition from the middle to the end. And what Karen's talking about is this transition from the middle to the end. For me, the end phase of the coaching conversation are all the 9-point X markers. They're all the constructing actions, creating accountability, acknowledging progress on the part of the coach and the client, and partnering to close the session. That might be all 5 of them right there. So it's all those things you do to complete and to create a complete coaching conversation. And what I find is that a lot of clients, they're not managing their time well. That's the underlying problem. And if you've got a 45-minute session and you don't want to go beyond that, because if it gets too long, it's not going to be evaluated. What that means is you have to manage your time well. And what a lot of coaches do is they'll go 40 minutes. They'll go up to 40 minutes exploring the topic of the coaching agreement. And then suddenly they realize, oh my God, I've got 5 markers I've got to get to here. And then they'll kind of abruptly jump into one of the 9-point X markers, and they'll either do it incompletely or they'll rush through it because I've got 5 markers to do and I got 5 minutes to do it. And it makes for a really clunky coaching session. I mean, you can just tell the person isn't managing their time well. So what I suggest to coaches, if you're having that problem, and if you're not really satisfied with how that end phase of your coaching is going, I literally recommend that you put a Post-it note again on your computer that says 30 or 35 minutes into the session, you need to transition into the end phase so that you allow ample time I had a student this last cohort at UT Dallas. She was amazing. I think she did it at least as good, if not better than I do. And I don't know how it was, but like a good 35 minutes into the session, she'd have a full 10 to 15 minutes left in the session. She just intuitively knew to ask a question like, and this is a great transition question to end phase. So with everything we've talked about so far today, what are you taking away? Now notice that evidence is one of the learning markers. And notice what it does for the client. It causes the client to stop discussing and exploring, and it invites the client to step back and reflect on the conversation today. What are you taking away from today? And usually that's a very powerful question. And when it's asked at that point, it's a great way of just gently edging into this end phase of the conversation. Because let's just say they say, gosh, I've got a much clearer understanding of why cleaning my closet is so important. I feel a lot more motivated to do it. I feel better about it. Then the next question is, so as a result of what you're taking away, what are some of the things you might want to do? Boom. Now you're constructing actions. And it just creates a natural segue into that ending phase of the conversation. So that's what you want to do. Fantastic. God, that sounds great. What do you need to do to make sure you actually do those things? Boom, accountability. And then there's 3 markers that are left. One of them is, so let's say the client's name's Karen. So Karen, you're taking that away. You're going to do those things. You know, when we set out today, you set out to do X. How do you feel like you've done today? That's letting the client, I can't remember how it's worded. The client measures their success at the end of the session and reevaluates how they've done. That's one marker. And when they're done saying that, you say, you know what, then you just weigh in on that yourself. You know, I really agree with you. And you know what else? I've just been amazed at the courageousness you've had in exploring this closet organizing thing, because I could feel that it was something that was weighing on you. So good for you. That marker is the coach recognizes the progress the client has made. And then one of the last, and you don't have to do these in this order, but this is kind of a natural order that it could take place. And then one of the last things you say is, so how should we finish up today? How should we end our session today? And notice you're partnering with your client on how to end it. You're not just like, well, we're about out of time. Let's do some scheduling for the next session. You're really, and that's another marker that I never did with my coaching clients till the markers came out. Never occurred to me to partner with my client in how to end the session. And so Karen, I can't remember which of those things specifically we talked about, but I think that was the process we talked about, Karen. That's
exactly it. And anybody that I'm coaching with now, they'll tell you, I pretty well still stick with that. I changed the question up a little bit, but it's that format, 30 minutes in, if it's a 45-minute session. If it's a 30-minute session, it's about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, because being ADD, I just get so involved in their talking that I'll let it go. So I kind of have a timer to help me remember, okay, this is not an all-day session. I have to have some discipline here and time management for them, the client, as well as for myself. So yeah, thanks a lot, Tom. That was probably, you talk about one thing that your mentor coach tells you, and it totally kind of changed my coaching. So thanks a lot.
Fantastic. Yeah, Karen, you're not alone. This is a very common thing, especially with less experienced coaches as you're learning. And we have to remember, it might seem kind of controlling and paradoxical that this is client focused, yet we're controlling. But really what we're doing is we're managing the time of the session so that our client gets the most out of the conversation they can, because they won't do these things naturally. If we just leave it to them completely, we'll just have a happy conversation for 40 minutes and say, well, that was fun. and that'll, it won't be a coaching conversation. So these are the things we do that are, it's lending structure from us into the coaching conversation in the service of our clients. And the markers is how we do it. And the markers are how we add value to that conversation for our client. Yeah. What other kind of questions do people have?
Tom, this is Elizabeth. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was great. I have a quick question. So when we talked about like how you measure success, what's your perspective regarding scaling questions? So like, say, in a scale 0 to 10, what's your, what do you think you will land from that standpoint?
Yeah, Lisbeth, I've got a really strong opinions on that. So you guys just have to take this all with a grain of salt. So I'm actually a psychologist by training, and I totally get scaling questions. They're really kind of a valuable tool. I can't say I never use them, but I'd say that I use them maybe 1% of the time. Maybe out of every 10 or 20 coaching sessions, I might use it once. And what my experience is, I experienced this at UT Dallas. At UT Dallas, we really emphasize scaling questions. And in my experience, what I find is that people overuse them. And it almost becomes a go-to place where it's just like, well, I don't know what else to do. I'll ask a scaling question. And what in my experience, 80 or 90% of the scaling questions that are asked, it's a missed opportunity to do something that would be much more helpful to our clients. But that's just my bias. So yes, scaling questions should be an arrow in your quiver. But I would use them very carefully. And I'd be really careful about not overusing scaling questions, because if you listen to your own coaching and you're using some scaling questions, when you listen to the coaching, pause the tape and ask yourself, is there something I could have done that would have been more helpful at that point than a scaling question? And my guess is 70% of the time, the answer will be, yeah, I could have done this, and I think that would have helped my client more. So, Lisbeth, I don't know if does that help? Does that jive with your experience at all?
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm a UTD. Yes, and it makes perfect sense. And it's spot on. Like, sometimes it's almost like a tool that we kind of put there because we feel like stuck and like, oh, well, maybe this is an easy way to, kind of move the conversation forward. But completely agree. Thank you so much for your perspective. Very helpful.
It's kind of a training wheel. And it's almost like, so I've given all of you some key phrases that you could use to measure success. I gave you an example of every one of the 9-point X markers for the closing phase. And those are like training wheels too. If one of those sounded good, you probably wrote it down. And so, yeah, great. Use it like a training wheel. But what you're going to find over time is you're going to find your own words for that aren't going to be exactly like my words. But if you want to use my training wheels just to get the wheels on the bus and to help demonstrate that to your client, over time, what's going to happen is you're going to internalize that and you're going to find your own language for that. And the same thing is going to be true for scaling questions. The more aware you are as a coach, the more you might think of a scaling question, but then you're going to think, no, I need a powerful probing question here more than just having them, rate something. Yeah, I'm rambling a little bit, but great question, Lisbeth. Any other questions?
Well, I'd like to know if you have any recommendations besides the taxonomy book that you have written. Are there any books or sources that you would recommend that we might want to investigate? Do you have any favorites?
Specifically geared to passing your ACC exam?
No, just coaching in general.
Yeah, so a part of my approach to coaching, this is kind of this is kind of separate from my work at UT Dallas. It's more about my own approach to coaching. Is I take kind of an ontological approach, and for those of you who don't know what that means, it's kind of like how our way of being as a person impacts the coaching conversation. And I do a lot of leadership and executive coaching. That's what my coaching business is. And I take that approach with my leaders because I help them look more deeply about how they're showing up, the way how their being is having an impact on the people they lead and the organization they work in. And a lot of that is grounded in some work I did with the Arbinger Institute. I don't know if any of you have heard of the book Leadership and Self-Deception. It's one of the books that's required reading in CTI's leadership program. If you're familiar with CTI's coaching program, it's Arbinger is where I got part of my coach training. And I can send you a link to the first 3 chapters of Leadership and Self-Deception. It's a really quick read, but it really introduces this whole idea of who you are as a being and how that affects everything you do and every impact you have on others. And so that's a very powerful book that really transcends the markers. It's well, I guess coaching presence also is a core competency. It kind of talks, it gives you a different perspective on what coaching presence might be, because that's something we all struggle with defining, right? Well, what does it mean to be present? And of course, the PCC markers actually try to operationalize that in the markers in terms of what coaching presence is, but I'm talking about this on a much deeper level than behavior. So I'll send a link to the first 3 chapters of that book for any of you to read. If you read the first 3 chapters and want to read more, it's available on Amazon for like under $15. It's a very inexpensive paperback. But great question.
Thank you for that.
But my taxonomy will be a lot more helpful to you.
Don't worry. I'm more intrigued by it than understand it at this point. So you did a good skimming over it. So I'm very curious.
Yeah. So I'm going to send a bunch of stuff to all of you. A link to the PC. Actually, maybe I'll just put it as an attachment. The original PCC markers, first 3 chapters of Leadership and Self-Deception, an abstract to the taxonomy, just in case any of that, you might find some value in any one of those things. It's a way of kind of taking this a little bit further.
Catherine, I'm sorry, Tom, I didn't even interrupt you. I was just going to ask, and then also we're going to have the link for this recording. But Tom said he would put it up on YouTube, correct?
Sure.
So if we can get the link and just send it to him, and then we can maybe, because I CC'd you on that email with this link, can you just, Tom, email us back through all of that? And
yeah, Rachel, I've got your email address and I'll just send everything to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is Elizabeth again. Just another quick additional thing, Tom, as you mentioned, in any maybe resource that we could use to pass our ACC as well. Do you have anything that you recommend?
Nothing beyond what I was talking about today. Okay. You need to familiarize yourself with the markers. You need to record and listen to your own coaching. And there's plenty of work to be done there to not go beyond that. When it comes to passing your ACC, I mean, now you know the rules. Now you know how the game is played. Now you just need to roll your sleeves up and really focus on growing your coaching. And there's plenty you can do on your own by familiarizing yourself with the markers and recording and listening to your coaching.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, gosh, we've got 2 or 3 minutes left. Any other thoughts? I'm curious about what any of you are taking away from our conversation today.
I think too much to say. I'm having a hard time capturing it all, but definitely appreciate the insights. There are some.
Thanks, Catherine. That's one of the downsides of my presentations being really content rich, is there's a tendency for people to feel the way you're feeling. I think it's just like, wow, that was a lot. I got a lot to think about. So, hopefully in the next couple days, as you're processing all of this that you've taken in this hour, if you have any questions or anything, don't hesitate to reach out to me. That's everyone, not just Catherine, because I do tend to be pretty content rich in my presentations.
Yeah, it was very helpful. Tom, just this is Elizabeth. I think the way you explain the markers, I think it's helpful because, I mean, there are like 47, but just the ability, I guess, to not just combine, but, to be fluid as we coach. I think that's I guess that's the extra step instead of almost following like a checklist, So I think sometimes that's a tendency, but, the way that you explain, it was very, the extra step that I guess for me personally, I need to make sure that my coaching sessions are fluid and not just like, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3.
Right. Yeah, Elizabeth, you guys have probably heard this before. It's like the 4 steps to mastery.
Yeah.
The first step is unconscious incompetence. Like, right? You don't even know, you don't even realize how bad you are. And then the second step is conscious incompetence, where it's like, oh my God, I really am bad. I really got to work on this. And this applies to anything, whether you're learning to dance, whether you're learning Tai Chi, learning to coach, right? But then that conscious incompetence is really powerful because it motivates you. It's like, wow, I've got a lot to learn. And if you're a lifelong learner, if you're someone who loves to learn, then it's like, wow, now I can roll my sleeves up. And when you first get introduced to the markers, it really can really create this conscious incompetence. It's like, how on earth am I ever going to do these 47 things with a client? And hopefully today gave you some context to that to make it a little less overwhelming. But the more you work with these markers, then you go to that next stage of conscious competence, where it's like you're with a client, you just start, oh yeah, this marker. Yeah. Oh my God, why didn't I do that before? Like with the learning markers for me and partnering to close the session. Those were breakthroughs for me in terms of how the markers changed me as a coach. But then we're all striving for that last level, which is unconscious competence, right? You've got all these arrows in your quiver and you don't even think about them when you're coaching your client. Your coaching client says something and you just intuitively know, yeah, this is going to add the most value. And then maybe on reflection, you go, oh my God, that was a learning marker. God, I didn't even think of it that way. I just responded to the client. So that's what we're all striving for. No matter how long you've been coaching, you're always trying to develop that deeper unconscious competence where you're just a coach and you've got so much experience and learning that it's just ingrained, it's in your bones. And that's what I want to support for all of you, wherever you are on that journey. Whatever I can do to support that, I'd love to.
Well, thanks again. We are at time. Do we have a